welcome. I'm John Iwata. I'm long associated with the Page organization. I spent 35 years at IBM, where I was the leader of the function, communications, as well as marketing and corporate citizenship for several years. I retired in 2018, and since then, among other things, I've been involved with the Yale School of Management, and we've been as part of a research effort that began around 2019, 2020. We have now interviewed more than 200 CEOs, mostly CEOs, as well as board chairs and others. And I wanted to share with you that insights from these ongoing interviews and case studies. And hopefully this is helpful to you as leaders of communications and as colleagues in our profession. We also have developed with Page a certificate program at the Yale School of Management. No doubt you've been seeing some promotions, information about that. We've done 2 so far, and we're offering the 3rd one this coming February, next month. And if you'd like to learn more about that, of course, there's lots of information available for you to do that. It's a great opportunity to spend a couple of days on campus at Yale and to earn a certificate as well. We do have the capacity today to have you submit questions, as I understand it, but because we are together for a relatively short period of time, I won't be answering questions in real time, but certainly do enter in your comments, observations, and questions, and I will reply to every one of them. And I do hope you will have some observations, if not questions. So let's get started here. Let me share a relatively short, actually a not so short deck, but I'll be going through these charts rather briskly. Okay, let me get that started. Hopefully you can all see these. Okay. So the work that I started with a couple of my colleagues at Yale led to the creation of what Yale calls a program. Other schools might call this an institute or a center. And you can see here what our mission is. This was established a little over 3 years ago. And the way to think about it, if I may suggest to you, is this is a way to understand the CEO agenda. The CEO agenda in a particular aspect, which is long-term value creation for investors through the lens of stakeholders. And as communications professionals and leaders, I think this is very familiar to us. You know, the firm has stakeholders. They do matter to every company. And if you're the CEO, and by extension, you're the CCO as a partner of the CEO, how does this dynamic play out? And how can we use it to maximum advantage? How can we be strategic about that? This program is co-led with 2 faculty colleagues. One is a professor of marketing, Ravi Dar, and the other is the former dean of the school and a professor of economics, Ted Snyder. Wonderful faculty colleagues who add academic rigor and unique perspectives to what I bring, which is of course mostly from the practitioner perspective. Lou Gerstner, former boss of mine, saved IBM in the early 90s, helped to form the program, and recently passed away. And he was one of our first interviews, and he had said this about this notion of stakeholders. It's not a new concept, but as you can see here in this quote, what is new is the context. And it calls for, therefore, new business practices, new leadership skills and methods. And Lou really believed this, and he and others who support the work at Yale believe that what was needed was not more theory, but practices. And we've been uncovering what we believe are some pragmatic things that can be implemented by the C-suite to help in this regard. We keep coming back to this quote from Satya Nadella of Microsoft. This quote is now quite old. It's 2019. And I think this says a lot. And so many CEOs that we've talked with say, I agree with Satya. You know, I came up to the CEO job through kind of a vertical finance or technology or sales or whatever it happens to be, got a little rounding out on the way up. But when I landed in the CEO role, I really wasn't prepared to understand and deal with this multi-constituent or multi-stakeholder world. I suddenly have governments and maybe regulators, I have retirees, I have investors, I have communities, I have maybe unions, and they're all expecting things of the corporation, and we're making promises to some of them. It's a very intense dynamic. How do I actually do this well? As I mentioned, let me back up. As I mentioned, we've now interviewed quite a few CEOs. We just interviewed our more than, I think, 205th just before the holiday here. Full disclosure, these are mostly US-based companies. I mean, many of them are multinational global enterprises, but they are heavily weighted toward the United States being in terms of their headquarters. They tend to be larger established enterprises, although we have been talking to startups as well. And I should say our interviews continue. And so if any of you would like to offer your CEO or others that you know to be interviewed for our research, by all means, we would welcome that introduction. As well, these interviews have led to a robust pipeline of case studies that we make available without charge to other schools, as well as to corporations. And we also have been integrating these cases into the curriculum at Yale and elsewhere. They're also used in the certificate program that we developed with Page. And these attempt to document, I would say, emerging practices that we've uncovered in our work. And I'll say a bit more about some of these as we spend our time together here. At the highest level, what have we learned? What we've learned is there are kind of two sets of CEOs that we've spoken with. They all acknowledge that engaging stakeholders strategically rather than reactively is important in long-term shareholder value creation, but they're struggling for ways to do this well. And there are others who believe the same thing, but they also have, for various reasons, they have created practices, methods, management systems that they believe aren't perfect necessarily. You know, very few of them say we figured it out, but we believe, by comparison with most CEOs and most companies, they have hit upon some pretty effective practices that bear examination and possibly adoption by others. Let me just kind of go through these insights from all of these interviews and deep dives into companies. And some of this may be very familiar to you. They don't view stakeholder capitalism, not all of them use that term, by the way, but this idea of the stakeholder dynamic as it relates to long-term value creation, it is an outcome. It is not the purpose of the corporation itself. The purpose of the corporation is still to create economic value for the owners, the shareholders. But to do that effectively, you do have to take this multi-stakeholder approach. And these are just a few quotes here from the leaders we spoke with. And again, in their own words, they talk about this one quote at the bottom here. It's not about changing what you do with the money you make, like making the world better or solving society's problems. It's about changing how you make money. So they are very much grounded in, this is not a moral imperative, it is a competitive reality, and it is an effective way to create long-term shareholder value. In fact, it's not an or, it's not a choice, it is a proven way to do it. It doesn't make it easy, however. Theme two is, this comes up a lot, purpose, culture, and strategy. Now, I know to communications leaders, purpose, culture, strategy are not new. In fact, this might be very encouraging to communications leaders that CEOs say it is this combination of purpose, culture, and strategy that is the foundation of what we should be doing here. And it is the foundation of our stakeholder relationships. And you see, again, some quotes from this. But I would say that what's different in what we have seen in some companies is that these are not, these are integrated into an approach or even a management system. It's not just purpose. It isn't just a focus on culture. It isn't just the execution of strategy. It's bringing these together. In fact, some CEOs say it's these three, eternal questions that have to be answered, but built into this kind of system. The why is our purpose, the what is our strategy, the how is our culture. Some might move them around in a different order, but so many of them, say these are the three foundational elements that they either revisited or created due to various circumstances. A wonderful example, a case study we developed here with the help of a colleague of ours, Andy Farrow. Many of you may know Andy at the Mars company. Mars is privately owned by the Mars family. And for various reasons, a few years ago, the shareholders, the family, working with management, and Andy was an absolutely core architect of this, developed a comprehensive management system that included financial and non-financial objectives. And that was wired into the operations of the company. This graphic, it looks very simple. This is not the outcome, that it has this, 4 quadrants with words and so forth. I mean, that's an expression of it. But what was really done here is this very in-depth, highly detailed articulation of the objectives or the purpose of the Mars company, translated into strategy with real objectives and KPIs and measurements, and then taken through into everything from resource allocation to performance management and executive compensation. And the Mars management team is using this not as a dashboard or like a roll-up of different, results from sustainability here and market share over there, but it's an integrated approach to planning the firm and holding people accountable for these results. And we haven't seen this in too many companies. And this is one of our case studies. And Andy Farrow has been a terrific partner and supporter of our being able to document this at Mars. Another theme, like when does a CEO say we have to look at purpose, culture, and strategy from top to bottom and take it very seriously? I don't think they jump out of bed one day and say, oh, let's just do this. We've observed it happens particularly at certain moments, and one is founding and what we might call refounding moments. Refounding, a company has lost its way. And arguably right now, some of the most iconic companies in business have lost their way. And these companies you see here in these headlines, they all have new CEOs, I think within the past year and a half. And thus far, every CEO has said, we have lost our way. We've got to get something back, not literally go back and replay some things that worked before, but we have to reinterpret what made this company very successful for new realities. And we see this in so many times in companies, not just transforming, not just turning themselves around, but getting back something that made the company distinctive and successful. We've published some work on this refounding concept recently, and just before the holiday, some articles were published about it that you can easily find here. Founding moments, yes, the startups, and we have case studies on our Warby Parker and Vital Farms and some other smaller, newer companies. But so many companies get created because of M&A. I mean, GE is not just one GE anymore. Johnson & Johnson is, spun out Kenvue, and on and on. And every time that happens, that new management team of the spin out is essentially, at a founding moment. and we've been documenting some of these too. Refounding moments, like under what circumstances does a company refound itself? Sometimes it's because of crises. Other times they anticipate change. And we saw that at Equinor, one of our great case studies, and a wonderful colleague of ours, Ryder Gurum at Equinor, helped us document this case study. They didn't wait for a problem. They didn't wait for regulation. They got ahead of it very methodically, very systematically, refounded the company. And by the way, the last thing they did was rebrand the company from Statoil, its prior name, to Equinor. And Rydard, like Andy Farrow at Mars, communications leader, but absolutely a co-architect and co-pilot of this highly substantial work. This idea that companies should take positions on societal issues, this continues to be the case, not just taking issues like making a statement, but doing something about issues that matter to the environment or to society. Of course, this has changed pretty radically since when we began this inquiry in this time period, just before COVID. And here in the United States, there were so many things that were exploding in terms of social issues at that time. Continues to this day, these things are not behind us by any means. But in this period of time, CEOs were speaking out. Their companies were speaking out. They were taking positions on a whole range of controversial issues. More recently, they are not at least publicly. Very, very few. Nonetheless, we continue to hear from CEOs that they still lack, as they did in 2019, most of them lack an approach, a philosophy, a management system to determine what issues are appropriate for the corporation to not just talk about, but to take action on and commit resources to. And we did a lot of work looking at best practices from companies. Some of them, in the cases I mentioned, what do they do? And we did find some very strong and good approaches, not just to plan scenarios and a form of crisis management, if you will, but actually looking for those opportunities and places and issues that the corporation should take a position on in terms of making change. And what you're looking at here is we call it a materiality assessment tool that we actually have worked with some entities such as the ASPCA in the United States that felt like they needed something like this. We ran what we call a lab with them, with their senior leadership, and they implemented this materiality assessment system pretty much holistically. And of course, this is available to all who may want to implement some version of this too. Social license to operate. Not every CEO uses this term, social license. They can talk about it in terms of freedom to operate. But the idea here is that you know it when it's revoked. And so many companies find themselves having to re-earn their social license because they may have stumbled in some way. It's certainly on the minds of CEOs today, and not just in regulated industries. Our program co-hosted an AI conference. Actually, we've done this 2 years in a row in 2024 and 2025 at Yale about AI. And one of the things that we did here is we surveyed the participants, several hundred, from business, from the academy, students, and civil society, and so forth. And I just wanted to point this out here about social license to operate. We asked the audience, who do you think is going to benefit most from AI? Big companies. Who do you think is going to be negatively impacted the most by AI? Employees and society. And so if your company, this is not about OpenAI or Anthropic and the providers of Gen AI and other AI technologies. This is about if your company is going to be using AI in some way, you may find yourselves, if you haven't already, thinking about social license. If you have a huge employee issue, job impact issue, you might have a union issue, and you might be regulated in some way in some part of the world because of AI regulation is felt it's necessary because business is not doing enough to, quote, self-regulate. CEOs talk about this quite a bit. Very promisingly, CEOs think that this idea that you have to make trade-offs between stakeholders. In other words, if I pay employees more, then I have to raise my prices, and that might hurt the customer. Or I have to decommit to profit for the shareholder. And this is this trade-off or zero-sum approach. And most CEOs don't accept that. That doesn't mean that they figured it out. But what we have seen is that in certain companies, quite actually more than a few, if it's framed, if this space is framed as we are going to do this and that, that leads to innovation because there's no other way to do it. We have to do it in a very different way. And we've seen examples of that. And you can see some quotes from CEOs who believe that this idea of the tyranny of trade-offs, it can be overcome by innovation, but it doesn't come naturally to companies. And we've seen some examples of it. And I want to talk about this a bit. I know we're running out of time here, so let me try to get to our point of view, which has been informed by these many years of work. This, again, is not about a moral imperative. CEOs, by and large, don't think of it that way, although they may personally care about people and planet. They do think of this as, how do we create sustainable competitive advantage and long-term shareholder value? This way, this stakeholder approach, if done strategically, has multiple businesses. And I'm going to walk through each of these very quickly. One is it de-risks our business model. And by de-risking, they don't mean reputation so much. They mean future cash flows. That if we don't de-risk the business today by making certain investments, then we aren't going to continue to grow our business tomorrow. So we better do that today. Equinor is an example of that. Enel, an energy company headquartered in Europe, got ahead of that. Warby Parker, for those who are familiar, I wear Warby Parker glasses. Warby Parker, they de-risked the business because they anticipated that they would have to scale and grow if they were successful, and they've been very successful. And I mentioned the Mars company. Secondly, yes, SLO. So some of us may remember Microsoft, was at war with everybody. The government wanted to break them up in Europe and the United States, and in the tech ecosystem, the value was all going to Microsoft and not to, all of the different partners and so forth. And what a turnaround there. And in talking to Microsoft leaders, they absolutely credit cultural transformation within Microsoft, an attitude shift leading to very different way of conducting themselves in business. And they don't have that kind of combative relationship with so many stakeholders before. Rio Tinto, in the mining industry, also a wonderful case study here, worth looking at. Absolutely a crisis situation and horrible business conduct turned around. How do they do it? Not by managing a crisis effectively, but by purpose, culture, strategy, investments. Suddenly, their stakeholder relationships, not just better, but a source of competitive advantage. And as I mentioned, this tyranny of trade-offs. Target has, Target's, not in the best shape today, but within Target, a massive, more than $30 billion revenue business in their private labels, what they call own brands. They're, the products you could only get at Target, quite a few of them. And when we looked inside of that part of Target, the way they develop new products, new brands, detergent, kitchen tools, baby products, what have you, is an example of this stakeholder innovation. In other words, they're bringing together environmental commitments and accessibility commitments, but also great products, so that the consumer is not making a trade-off between, well, I want to do something that is eco-friendly, but it's going to be more expensive, or it's going to not be as good as a non-green product. No, Target says we're not going to permit that to be a trade-off. We have to design and solve for all of these different requirements in everything that we create. And the Hartford is an example of that in the net zero commitment space. How do they do this? It's this holistic integrated management system, and it gets back to purpose, culture, and strategy being not just words and campaigns and so forth, but part of the management system. And right now, you see this quote from Doug McMillon, Walmart CEO. This is probably our flagship case study that is now underway. We interviewed Doug. We're interviewing his senior leaders right now. Hope to have this case study wrapped up in a few months. And this is what we're saying, that this quote on the right, which is to the shareholders of Walmart, by the way, has been nice words. But what we're seeing here is that Walmart, which had a very bad set of stakeholder relationships not that long ago, completely changed this around, turned this around. Why? Not through good messaging and good crisis management, but by changing how they lead Walmart. And it's very similar to some of the other companies that we have documented. Again, as with Walmart, what led to this change, or at Microsoft or at Rio Tinto, sometimes they're anticipatory, and sometimes it's because they stumbled or lost their way. And in that regard, we see they're looking for help. What does this all mean for the communications leader? Well, I just said it. When we ask these CEOs, so when you find yourself in these situations, who do you look for to help you when you look at the C-suite? And I wish they would say more often, well, obviously the communications leader is my go-to person. They don't, although as I've shared with you, in some companies they do, such as at Mars and Equinor and others. But it is an opportunity for communications leaders to step up. But it does require, that all sounds good and appealing, I know, for all of us who aspire to when you have that seat at the table, as we say, is what do you do with it? And right now, CEOs are asking and looking for help. And to be effective partners in this kind of work, it does require new skills, perhaps some new tools and methods. And our work at Yale is an attempt to surface those, document those, find them, and to make them broadly available. And I do hope that, well, I guess there was one more chart, which is about this program. Let's see here. So as I said, next month at Yale, for a couple of days, we will be holding the certificate program, which has been created with Page for communications leaders, drawing upon the cases and insights that I shared with you very briefly today. And hopefully, for those who haven't already gone through the program, you'll consider it, or consider perhaps sending a colleague from your organization to benefit from that. So with that, I know we're at time. I wish we could have an interactive session. This is a little strange for me just to be talking without seeing you or interacting with you, but thank you for making time for this. And please do send in some of you. I see, oh, Ryder, you're there. I was just singing your praise, Ryder Guillaume from Equinor. If you do have comments or questions, please send them to me directly if you have my email, or send them here on the webinar. And again, thank you for making time for today's session.